The broadcast is live. I just been notified that it's live. So again, welcome to another hour of Do the Knowledge Radio with the Not Abba Dream Team, hosted by yours truly, the incomparable Red Fidel. I am the National Chief Strategist of New Order National Human Rights Organization under the awesome leadership of Gerald Emerson Rose, whom I give a strong salute to. This week, everyone, we have a great guest, a special guest on our show, none other but Attorney General Gerald Griggs, someone who has definitely just laid the bricks down for justice and advocacy, not only in Georgia but just nationwide. Someone whom I'm pretty sure that you're going to enjoy the information coming from him. The brother is very sharp. The brother is definitely doing big things in the community and the nation abroad. So I'll let him give you, some kudos on himself and let him tell you who he are or who he is. And so, brother Griggs, let our viewers and our listeners know who you are. Give them a brief background on who you are, and just let them familiarize yourself with them.
Okay, and thank you for having me on the platform, and thank you to Gerald Rose for hooking this interview up. I'm Attorney Gerald Griggs. I am a civil rights attorney, social justice and civil rights activist, and a native Atlantan who just prides myself on fighting for those that need justice. So I'm known as a justice fighter. Been on the front lines for a long time in the struggle, and just happy to be on this platform and share some of my knowledge.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now with that, because I mean, a lot of people, the title is Attorney Gerald Griggs, but when I looked you up and me just following your career, I noticed that you've held numerous titles like Vice President of NAACP or President-elect of this organization, and I think that's something important that our viewers need to know because it just shows the many hats that you wear in your road at advocacy and your journey and your pursuit of justice as it stands. So I just think it's important also just to make note of that and let people know that you're not only an attorney but you're someone that actually puts your action where your mouth is at and your word is at, and I think that's important as well.
Definitely. And I forgot to mention that Vice President of the Atlanta chapter of the NAACP, former third Vice President of the state conference, the Georgia State Conference of the NAACP, co-founder of the Georgia Alliance for Social Justice, which launched the biggest march in Georgia history. One of the co-conveners of the People's Uprising, which is responsible for many of the protests we've seen in Atlanta since George Floyd and Rayshard Brooks, and of course our brother Ahmaud Arbery and Jimmy Atchison. So I'm in the streets. I'm just a servant of the people trying to fight for what's right, and I'm just one of these brothers that's sick and tired of black people being abused, and we're going to do something about that.
That's awesome, man. I feel the same way, and it's good to hear that, man, because a lot of, I'm pretty sure a lot of your constituents or people that's attorneys, a lot of them don't really stand on the front line like that. So I salute you for actually having the courage and actually exemplifying the bravery to do so, because I know how dangerous that can be to some degree, So definitely, my brother, a strong salute to you. Now, what I would like to ask, because in going into my questions, is one thing I noticed is one of your, let's just say, one thing that I noticed you're dedicated, and I noticed is like on your site or whatnot, you say you're dedicated to seeking truth, mercy, and justice forever. That's a very bold and strong, I would call, like, let's just say a motto, mission statement, creed, or whatever label you want to put it under. So it made me actually say, okay, I like that. But something stuck out to me, and this is where I'm going to go with this. What stuck out to me was truth, I'm feeling that. Justice, I'm feeling that. The mercy part stuck out to me. And here's what I'm asking. Like, let's go to the definition of, when I go to define mercy, something led me to ask, okay, what about mercy? When I look up mercy, mercy is, let's just say, a compassion of forgiveness, right? Shown towards someone whom it is within one's power to punish or harm. That stuck out to me. So with that being said, my question is, with this country's blatant disregard for Black lives and its constant turning of a blind eye to justice, is it counterproductive and counterintuitive for us to be seeking mercy from a system that has shown itself incapable and or unwilling to show us any in the first place? And I would like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good way of looking at it. When I made that statement and when I live by that motto, I'm not talking about seeking mercy from the system. I'm talking about seeking mercy for my clients and for the people that I service through the system. And I definitely agree with you. For 401 years, the system has disproportionately tried to destroy African Americans. And I think it's incumbent upon attorneys in the vein of Thurgood Marshall and Atty Walton and Charles Hamilton Houston and Donald Lee Hollowell to be that buffer between the system and the oppressed and force the system to be what it says on paper. A great example of that is one of my mentors who I still have not met yet, but I look up to this person, and that's Fred Gray, who was the attorney mainly on the front lines for the civil rights movement. So I think that when I talk about mercy, I'm not talking about being merciful to the system. I'm talking about making the system show mercy to the oppressed. And that's why it's important to have attorneys on the front line because we know the law. We also know how to change the law, and we know how to make the law bend.
Exactly. And that's what I felt. I felt that, but still, and and I'm speaking for the voiceless as well when I say that. I feel that, but it's like, again, we're asking or seeking mercy from, to me, what seems to be a system or a machine that is incapable of actually even showing that. So even an attorney that knows the law, it seems like you're limited even in your ability to bend, or I'll say make this system acquiesce to show any kind of mercy when there's none even in there, and I would say in the hearts of the system to even give any for people. And it's shown itself historically. So I mean, like, I'm one of those people that's kind of at that point of sick and tired of being sick and tired and fed up, and like so many of us and so many you represent. So I guess that's my biggest concern. And I'm not directing that question. I'm not directing it at you because I know what you said makes a lot of sense. But you get my point when I say that it just seems like the system is not merciful at all, especially what we see repeatedly in countless situations and cases and different situations where we're still being killed. We're still being victims of brutality. We're still being victims actually of ourselves as well. So I'm not going to leave out black on black crime too. So it's like even the mercy has to play itself both ways. But I also believe that, when you're a product of an environment, you're a product of a toxicity that is unmerciful. Then it's like we coexist and we live in something that I don't know where mercy is going to come from, except if you're in church asking for mercy from your Lord and Savior, anything to that effect. So that's just one of the ones that make me just it sends me in thought when I think about that. But I do like the endeavor. I do like the fact that is a creed of what you stand for, because most people they don't add that. They might say truth, justice, and equality, but the fact that you say mercy, that really hits home in a lot of areas. So I salute you on that, my brother. But I also salute you in trying to get mercy from a monster or a machine that I feel that's like climbing a mountain with oil on it. I mean, that's a slippery slope, my brother. Seriously, and it's showing up over and over.
But I think also one of my other slogans is that I fight giants and I try.
That's what I'm talking
about. What I think people need to understand is the system is a monster. It is a giant, but it can be dropped. And those lawyers that I just mentioned, a long litany of lawyers have done it for such a long time that it's incumbent upon our community not to have a defeatist attitude and think that you cannot overcome the system, because our ancestors have overcome the system so many times. And it's important that we use all of the tools available to us to force this system to be what it says on paper for everybody. So I hear what you're saying, brother, and I agree to a certain extent, but I still have to push back because, again, even in this past 4 years, people were disheartened and believed that we were sliding backwards. It was attorneys on the front lines making sure that we did not slide backwards, whether it's Stacey Abrams registering people to vote, whether it's attorneys like myself, fighting in court and filing lawsuits and making sure we didn't lose our rights, whether it's lawmakers who happen to be attorneys making sure we put up defenses against this administration, and ultimately now voters and attorneys, and now new administration that hopefully will hold the line. And if they don't, we're going to hold them accountable too. So I think we got to look at this from a historical context, of the last 401 years. There have always been fighters on the front lines, whether it's Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, of course, our dear brother Thurgood, and our dear brother Fred Gray, and Fannie Lou Hamer and Constance Baker Motley, and so many legendary names that have been on the front line. We cannot get disheartened that we are still not to the promised land, but we're still not in a wasteland either. We're in a transition period. And so we must continue to move forward and remind people how far we have come, yet how far we still have to go.
Man, that's powerful. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And in that, I would like to add, I mean, I totally feel you, but it seems like as we go on and as we progress as a people and as because you know I'm out there with the youth a lot, and I'm out there with the elders too as well. I see that, you know, the biggest fight is becoming mental. The biggest fight is becoming such a mental and spiritual war to where, you know, that controls all the intangible controls the tangibles. So it's like now it seems like we have been enslaved on a mental level with so many distractions, so many different influences that now affect our way of thinking to the point where you spoke of ancestors, you spoke of different, they didn't have all that. The unification amongst them was so much greater because of all we had was each other to lean on. And I think with sometimes too much, I would say and I'm gonna use a D word, being diversification, or this is, let's just say, with so many distractions and diversification, it seems like it impairs our ability to be unified on a front where we move, we think, and we actually combine and come together as one for one particular cause, because there's so much bickering amongst us as a group, so many little subgroups and so many things taking place to where the fight is actually amongst ourselves to where we can't even see the bigger fight that's being opposed against us. So it seems to never really allow us to actually move forward in our progression for that change, for that revolutionary change that you speak of as an attorney, that we speak of as activists on the front line for what we're trying to do. So it's just, I see it becoming very difficult. And it seems that the system or systems that have been put in place are playing on that and making it that much more difficult for us to come together. And, you know, with that lack of unification, then, you know, as like I know, a people divided are people that's already conquered. So with the division that's amongst us, it seems like it's just so difficult for us to come together with this divided mentality that we have. And that's why I think the grand chess game is being played with keeping us divided on a mental level, on so many levels. So the distrust for the judicial system, the distrust for lawyers in itself. There's a lot out there that don't trust attorneys because one of the things, especially on the streets, is, I mean, like, first of all, as an attorney, and I don't mean to sound so garrulous right now and loquacious, I'm getting the opportunity to speak, but as an attorney, on the real, most of the people that need attorneys can't afford attorneys. Most of the people that really need attorneys can't afford attorneys, and those that are really in situations, they can't really actually attain or acquire the retainment or the retainer to actually retain an attorney. So that's so many cases that are unheard of and heard of that are, you know, the same kind of equivalent to those cases down on the national scale. So that's one thing I just say, you all's work is so busy. I can understand, man. I bet you got so much on your plate at this point. So many people pulling at you. So many people want your services. And I just know I don't even know how you deal with that, to be honest with you, man. That's a whole nother level, man. Like you're a Superman, man, to be honest with you. You're like a Superman in this cause right now, my brother. Seriously.
Yeah. Well, I just think that people need to understand something, and they need to understand the historical context upon which we are living in. We've always been a divided people. Even when we were brought over on the slave ships, we all didn't come from the same tribe. We all didn't come from the same part of Africa. And I think that it's a misnomer to think that African Americans are a monolith. But what we are unified is in the pursuit of justice. And, you know, there's a lot of messages that are going out. But there were a lot of messages in Dr. King's time. There were a lot of messages in Frederick Douglass' time. There were a lot of messages in Harriet Tubman's time. We never been unified, you know. And my ancestors who taught me and my mentors, Dr. Vivian, Dr. Lowry, Representative John Lewis, all said the same thing. Only 15% of the Black population marched with Dr. King. So it's a misnomer to sit here and say that they were even unified in that time. But what we have to realize is the time we are in right now. We have no time for petty divisions because the oppressor doesn't care whether you believe that you're being oppressed or not. You are. And if you don't unify in a steady progression, you're going to go backwards. And I think that's what we're fighting against right now. And I think we're being successful. We're winning. And, you know, we have to not worry about those that are being dismayed about the fact that they don't think this is happening fast enough, my question to them would be, what are you doing to make it happen faster? Because, you know, just like Mary Shad Katie wrote to Frederick Douglass, who Frederick Douglass is one of the great orators of all time. Less talk, more action. She wrote that directly to him. So if she can write that to him, and she was a lawyer and an abolitionist and a newspaper editor in the 1800s, what are we doing in 2020? And then to push back on the lawyers, you know, the conversation about attorneys. There are always groups of attorneys that are fighting that, you know, don't demand pay for their fighting. They're called public defenders. And I know in our community, there's a great distrust of public defenders, but I was a public defender. You know, I was a super lawyer or a justice fighter before I was a private attorney. So we have to focus on the resources that are available and take advantage of those. Make sure that we understand how the system really works. Make sure that we educate ourselves. We are in the greatest time to be alive right now because information is at the push of a button. You can find out everything that you need to know on the push of a button, but we're not educating ourselves appropriately. And then we're not putting that education into action. And I think that's why it's important for us to use platforms like this to educate people about our history, about leaders of the past, not just, you know, the Mount Rushmore of leaders, but other leaders like John L. Johnson and Julian Bond and so many others that have been on the forefront of movement and that have moved us to the point that we are. Because contrary to popular belief, we are in the best position that we ever have been. Okay, yes, we had the hiccup that was the 4 years of Donald Trump, but we also have to remember that we are not having lynchings on the same level that they had them in 1950. It may seem as though they are because of the virility of these police-involved shootings, which we are addressing, but we are in a much better place than we were, and that was because of the sacrifice of our ancestors. So when we talk about we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, we have to do the work of our ancestors, and it starts by learning their history. You have to learn the history of movement. That means you need to study. You need to study Stokely Carmichael. That means you need to study Assata Shakur. You need to study Dr. King. You need to study Frederick Douglass. You need to study Thurgood Marshall before you make comments about we are in a worse place than we ever have been. That is absolutely not true. And we are moving forward because of our collective knowledge of what happened in the past and now our expertise in moving us forward.
Man, you sound like a military general.
Sometimes you have to be. You have to keep the troops focused.
Man,
you know,
I love it.
That's why Harriet had a shotgun.
I love it, man, and that's why I pose these questions, because you know, when I told, you know, some of my constituents that you're going to be on the show, some of the things I'm asking you are what people kind of wanted to hear from you. So
Definitely.
You know, a lot of my they're not my personal thoughts. Some are, I interject with my own, but I'm actually just speaking for those who don't have a voice to ask you personally. So I'm glad that you clarifying that.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
And I appreciate the questions.
Yes, sir, definitely, my brother. And I like the fact you very knowledgeable about what you're talking about. You know, and that's true. And what's something that stuck out to me was you spoke of leaders. Now, you definitely spoke of the known ones, but I like the fact that you spoke of Stokely Carmichael. You spoke of
Assata
Shakur. Those two stuck out to me because one of the things now you're speaking to me. Those are the shoulders that I grew up on. I grew up under a radical umbrella family those were my first teachers. Like, you know, of course, school taught you MLK. That was automatic. George Washington Carver, MLK, you're going to learn it off the rip. But I'm talking about the ones that they didn't teach you because of their rhetoric at the time and what they quote unquote represented to the system, which was a threat at the time, you know, especially with Assata Shakur. That's something they still won't talk about to some degree. But you're right. I feel the youth and even some of our elders and those that's in the middle of eldership and youth need to go back and research and study these people and study the movements and the things that they represented and how they maneuvered within that system and how they were able to overcome certain circumstances that allowed us to prevail in times of peril where, you know, we needed to actually transfer, you know, injustice for justice. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like you're doing right now. So I totally agree with you on that. And I think that more people need to go back and learn more about these people. But how can you really learn something when you probably never was even told about these people? So when something is being inculcated and just promoted to you all your life, like MLK, they're going to tell you about Martin Luther King, but they're never going to tell you about the radical side of Martin Luther King.
No, they're not going to tell you about Dr. King after 65.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to tell
You got to read. You got to read his books.
Yeah,
You know,
you got to read his book.
One of the greatest gifts I've ever been given was Dr. Bernice King gave me Dr. King's last book, Community of Chaos. Where do we go from here? Where he talked about his transition in ideology and left a blueprint for further movement. And then another thing people don't teach you is there was movement after 1968. The movement just didn't stop. And so that's one of the great things that a lot of my mentors taught me. You have to study the complete movement. The movement didn't stop in 68. You got to study the Black Power movement. You got to study the Black Panthers. You have to study what happened during the drug pandemic that tried to destroy the African American community. So once you learn the full scope of the movement, now you can respect that there's more ways to move than just Malcolm or Martin. I mean, you still had Fred Hampton. You have the Black Panther Party, which is still around. You have a lot of leaders that were in the civil rights movement that are still around. Now you have the Black Lives Matter movement with new leaders that are around right now. So I love my sister Tamika Mallory and my son. And then you have the grassroots organizers like Mary Hooks, who's here in Atlanta doing phenomenal things. Devin Barrington Ward, and so many others that are on the ground here in Atlanta and around the country that are doing movement and that can teach you movement history. You have to understand. Of course, Tiffany Williams Roberts was an attorney here. You can learn movement history from and understand where you are in the movement, and then pick up your skill set and give it to the movement. You know, you could be a great school teacher. We need educators in the movement. You could be a great doctor. We need movement doctors. Of course, you need movement lawyers. And we have to all be moving in the same direction. So it's a lot of places that you can inject yourself. But the first thing you have to understand is that the movement is one movement. From abolition to Black Lives Matter, it's one movement. And so once you understand that, now you can start to see, oh, so this is why Harriet Tubman worked this way. Or, oh, this is why Thurgood thought this. Or, oh, this is why Frederick Douglass thought this way. It's the same ideology. Now, there are different ways of participating in that liberation ideology. Because that's what it is, liberation. We're fighting for the liberation of our people.
Exactly.
Different roads, but we all going to the same destination as liberation.
Interesting you say that. Now, with the founding fathers, when they drafted the Constitution,
yeah,
in that Constitution, I mean, it's known fact that we really weren't included in that Constitution.
Okay.
So, with that, especially from a law standpoint, and you know that very well, you're well versed in that. Do you think that, and ultimately to attain the liberation that you speak of, we need to first go actually correct and rewrite the books on that, especially with the whole, the argument has been for many years with us being 3/5 human and such and boom, because, we really wasn't included. And we were more considered chattel slavery. So my thing is, are we fighting a fight that really needs to start on paper versus in the whole brutality and action thing? Because to me, I feel that's how police are really getting exonerated. Because when you look at cases, let's just say like the Dred Scott case and cases like that, and I'm not, I'm just kind of paraphrasing. I haven't looked at it in a while, but it seems like at that time he was able to actually lose that case because it came down to the fact that Black people are really not considered citizens in America. And to this day, that same standing seems to still stand. Now, correct me if I'm wrong by saying such.
Yeah, it doesn't stand. It doesn't stand anymore. And I think that's why it's important for people to fully educate themselves.
Okay.
There is jurisprudence that goes all the way back to the founding of this country, but jurisprudence evolves over time. So you got Dred Scott, which was lost. And then, of course, you had Plessy versus Ferguson, which was after Dred Scott, and that case was a loss. And then you had Brown versus the Board of Education, which outlawed segregation. And then you had the constitutional amendment, which gave Black people standing. We're no longer 3/5 of a person. Now, yes, in the original draft of the Constitution, we were 3/5 of a person with the Missouri Compromise. But again, we have to fast forward to 2020. I know a lot of people are trying to go back and study their history, but this is why it was important to be awake during American history class and American civics class and constitutional law. The Constitution evolves over time. This is why it was great that my first year in law school, I got to have a great conversation with one of the believers of the originalist doctrine of constitutional interpretation, and that's Anton Scalia, former Supreme Court justice. And so I used to believe that the Constitution should be interpreted the way it was written, but I'm a living document. My jurisprudence is a living document. That means it evolves over time, and you can see that by the amendment. And so when people are talking about, oh, the Constitution was never written for Black people, that's true, but the amendments were. So if we talk about 13th Amendment, 14th Amendment, 15th Amendment, 19th Amendment, and so forth, the people that were left out of the original document were included in the document, and now you have case law that fully puts meat on the bone, because the Constitution is just a floor to your civil rights. More rights can be added through case law, through legislation, through statutes. That's why it's important to know the United States Code. It's important to know US 42 US 1983. 42 is the Civil Rights Code in the actual US Code. So when we start having these conversations about history and about Black folks having no rights, that's not true. And that's why it's important to have lawyers like myself, lawyers like Thurgood Marshall, lawyers like Johnny Cochran, lawyers like Fred Gray, and now lawyers today, of course, Chris Stewart and Lee Merritt and Ben Crump and a host of other civil rights lawyers that are continuing that work. So when we have Black people that keep saying we don't have rights in America, that's not true. We keep saying we keep losing these police-involved shooting cases. That's not true. There are several cases in Georgia that I can name right now. The Gregory Olson case, which was Anthony Hill's case, that officer for 20 years in prison for killing an unarmed African American. So there are numerous cases around the country where we're getting victories. It just takes a while. And so I think what's important is that we allow the experts that we trust to educate us in real time. Because we can talk about the past, but the past is just that. We are American citizens. This country was built by our ancestors. Our ancestors fought and died for us to have these rights. The rights to be free, to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the right to vote, the right to fight in all American wars. We were the first people to die in every single American war. So we are more American than anybody else, save the indigenous people. And so what we have to understand is we have to force America to be what it says on paper for everybody. And that happens two places. One, at the ballot box, and two, in a courthouse. So if you believe that your rights have been violated and that you have not been treated as a full-fledged American citizen, the first place you need to go is to the courthouse and to enforce your legal rights. Because trust me, you have legal rights.
Powerful. You know what? I really, man, I think that is some of one of the most important. That's an important piece of information you just offered, because so many people don't know those amendments you just spoke of. I mean, you enlightened me as well. That'd be a great idea, man, for you probably to add that like on your site or something, so people can get a little bit more aware and become more informed of that. Because that what I said to you is something that's so pervasive amongst people who just don't know, and they live in this place of not knowing. So not knowing actually becomes your slave master. Not knowing becomes the shackle that holds you back, because you can't move forward because you're still operating and existing from a thought process that's antiquated, and we're so much past that. And I think that's a good point, man. I really, that information is very, very good information. I think a lot of people need to be privy to and kind of just informed of that. So that's something I'm going to look into and get with you, man. Afterwards, I'll probably, get with you on the side and just kind of give me some of that information. And I'll take the onus upon myself to actually create something where I can probably disseminate some of that information to, my peers and people who may not know, because that's great information to know. And that already shuts the door on that fight and that mindset. So we can go on to the next of building and putting those building blocks in place, like you aforementioned, to actually, getting in the fight a little bit more, because that's holding people back, man, not knowing the truth, not because so many people feel they're not citizens. And so many people feel they don't. But speaking of which, you brought up the elections and the voting process. And that's a good question, because while you was talking, I was thinking with that, one of the things the argument was in these prior elections from so many was, why do I want to vote? First of all, everybody, the saying was the lesser of the two evils. I get that. But it still was important to vote at the end of the day. You got to pick someone. You got to pick someone that we feel we can leverage as a people, as a nation, to actually carry out deeds that we present to the table or things that we bring. So I think that, it was important for us to vote, and we came out in record numbers. But there was a lot of us, and there's an increasing number of us that are growing, saying that, why I need to vote? My popular vote, it weighs little. Everything is based on an electoral vote. And I get that. So I just think that with the electoral vote deciding our presidents and these, what we would call ununited states of America, I mean, like, what would you say to those who actually hold strong to that belief, thinking that they don't have to vote because their vote doesn't matter, because it's just a popular vote and basically the president is chosen off electoral votes? Explain that process so with clarification, so these people and those who believe that will know exactly how important it is for them to go to the ballot box.
Yeah, and I think what people need to understand is America is a democracy, but it's a hybrid democracy. It's actually a republic. And so the United States are actually divided into two different forms of government. So you got the federal government and you got the state government. Well, the president is elected from the popular vote in a state. So for everybody to keep saying, oh, I don't need to vote because my vote doesn't count because the electors elect the president, we got a great education in this past election, especially here in Georgia.
That's right.
But if you win the popular vote in the state of Georgia, that's right, and all the other 49 states, you win the electors in that state. The Supreme Court has already decided this earlier this year. I think it was in May of 2020, with the unfaithful elector, where state law can mandate the elector to vote in the way that the popular vote in that state went. Perfect example here in Georgia. Almost 5 million people voted. I think President Biden won by 12,000 votes, which means he gets all 16 electors in Georgia, which means my vote, and I voted for President Biden and Vice President Harris, counted towards him winning Georgia, which is why we were yelling, count every vote. And so because of my vote and everybody else's, we won that race to get those 16 electors. You got to get to 270. So that means you got to win enough states to get to 270. So if we focus on popular vote, focus on the popular vote in the state, because we are the United States. There's no such thing. Let's just throw some out there. There's no country called America. Absolutely no country. There are actually two countries on North American soil. Actually, three: Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So if we keep on saying, oh, my vote doesn't count because I'm an American citizen, well, no, you're a citizen of the United States of America. So if you voted in that state, the popular vote in that state is what determines who the president will be, because the electors go with the popular vote. So let's just throw all that out the window. Now, let's go a little bit deeper.
Talk to me.
If your vote didn't count, the popular vote determines who your senators are, and it also determines who your House of Representative members are directly. So if we just don't vote, we don't even get a voice in the second branch of government. But let's go a little deeper. If we don't vote, we don't get an opportunity to help choose the third branch, which would be the Supreme Court, because the president, with the advice and consent of the Senate, selects judges to sit on the Supreme Court, justices. And those justices can overturn law. So when we sit here and say, well, we don't need to vote, it's not going to affect us, well, the Supreme Court was the one that gave us our freedom by interpreting what the Constitution said as it relates to Black people. So are we really going to just throw away our ability to determine who's going to sit in the Supreme Court for life, or in the federal court on down, the district court and the Court of Appeals? Those are lifetime appointments, but we're just not going to participate in that because that don't matter. Or we're not going to vote all the way down the ballot for state senators and state representatives and the governor, which are directly elected by the people to govern the state. Or we're just not going to vote for the mayor who appoints the police chief, which is the reason why we continue to have these police-involved shootings, because the police are a form of local and county government. So you have to understand civics all the way down. That's why it's so ridiculous when you hear people say, well, I don't vote, it don't affect me. Well, you pay taxes, so it directly affects you. You drive on the county and the city roads, which means if you violate a law on those county and city roads, the government's gonna come get you and gonna lock you up. So I really don't understand this alternate reality that people are in. And I think the most important reason why it's important to vote is because in Georgia and many other states, if you are a registered voter, that means you go on the pool of people that can be selected for jury duty. And if you are in the pool, you can directly affect the outcome of the criminal justice system by sitting on a jury. So again, these civic responsibilities directly affect your life. And so it's important for us to know the truth about all of this and not conspiracy theories, because you don't want somebody else determining your future. And when you don't vote, somebody else is determining your future. And this is the only, and we talk about revolution, and this is why I consider myself a revolutionary. In this country, it's one of the few countries in the world where you can have a peaceful revolution without a bullet. Malcolm X said, you either have the bullet
or the ballot.
Both of those involve power. This is the only country in the world where you can overthrow the government every 2 years, the presidency every 4 years, by voting. So again, even though the founding fathers did not envision the free labor class, which is the African Americans that were brought over here as chattel slaves, having participation in this process, we now have it because our ancestors fought and died for the ability for us to determine our own future. You know, I'm the first generation, the very first generation of African Americans in my family to be born with all my rights. I'm gonna say that again. 1965, African Americans were given their full citizenship. That means if you were born after 1965, you had all your rights. You're the first generation. But we're talking about nothing has gotten better, nothing has changed. Ruby Bridges was the first African American to desegregate a Southern elementary school. Ruby Bridges is 66 years old.
That's that popular picture when she was a young girl carrying the books, right? In the military.
Yes, the same picture that they've now superimposed with Kamala Harris. She's 66 years old. Her mother just died. Her mother was 84. We really having this conversation? Because we 3 generations out of slavery. 3. Slavery was 152 years ago. Okay? We 3 generations out of slavery. Because you take the average generation is between 65 to 70 years. So 70 years ago, my parents. 70 years before that gives you what, 140 years?
Right.
That's slavery, or right after slavery.
Right. Your
Are
grandparents.
we're really talking about we haven't accomplished much. Okay.
Yeah, it definitely. I totally agree with you. And for many people, they just feel that way. But an adage I would like to make is you mentioned something that Malcolm quoted when he said the ballad of the bullet. Malcolm also said that there has never been a revolution without bloodshed. So that's something that it may not come to that, but it's definitely something in the air.
Has there not been a revolution without bloodshed? What do you think the civil rights movement was? Was that not a revolution?
Honestly, I think it. A part of me wants to say yeah, and honestly, I'm gonna be real. I don't think a part of me wants to say I don't think so.
Do you know how many?
I think it was a major win. I think it was a win. I think it was a change. But just to kind of harp on you, like you stated before, what Martin, and some of Martin's books and some of the literature that wasn't privy to most people. I think Martin himself, and it's just off of just what I think. It's not fact. I think Martin himself may have actually thought otherwise about what took place with that quote unquote supposed to be revolutionary change with us now becoming the whole civil rights movement. Because in Malcolm's word again, what's civil rights without human rights? You could be civil all day, but if you're not treated like a human first, then where's the civility in that? You know what I'm saying? So that's something that that's kind of like I question sometimes beyond. But I understand your point when you say was it not revolutionary? But yeah. a true revolutionary, which is a changing of the gods and the guards, a true revolution, which is a total debacle of a system in order for the uprising of something else. A revolutionary is like the fires in on the West Coast, because we're looking at that as I'd say a bad situation. But here's the good in that: once them fires are up, a new forest will be born. A new fertilization is taking place with the ash. A new something. So it's a revolutionary thing nature-wise, but it may be something not revolutionary to those who are enduring the aftermath of what's taking place. So there's so many ways you can look at that from a revolutionary standpoint. It's just not something that's off of paper and everything. Because if it was truly revolutionary, then honestly, some of the conversations that we're having right now wouldn't even be taking place, because we would have revolutionized ourselves from that whole extremity of that negative extremity that took place at that time that was still actually going through right now. So those things are in question, but I understand. I really understand where you're coming from when you say that. But I'm still out there, and I'm a little bit more radical in my thought process.
But here's what happened, and I think this is why it's important to understand movement history. Dr. King was killed in 1968. We had the rise of the Black Power movement, which was going to be a continuation of movement that was going to revolutionize the way African Americans thought and how we move. And then what happened? COINTELPRO and the destruction of the movement and the destruction of the leaders, which led into mass incarceration, which we are still in. So again, my question was, has there not been a peaceful revolution? We are still in the process. And so what I would just say to those that are revolutionary, I would argue to look at the other countries that benefited from the civil rights movement. You have a litany of countries on the African continent and in the Caribbean who are about 50 years old. Why are they 50 to 60 years old? Because they took the same philosophy that Dr. King and others in the movement had, and they actually got their independence from colonialism. And so, again, there can be peaceful transfers of power. We just have to know the tools. Representative Lewis, who almost died on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, said the most powerful nonviolent weapon we have is the vote. When you start giving the vote away or not holding politicians accountable to the promises that they make to get the vote, then we get to a stagnation. And that's where I argue that we are right now. We voted and just expected things to happen. This election, I think we are thinking differently because we went through an attempt to go backwards. And so now we have voted, but we're going to hold people accountable, starting with the new president of the United States and the new vice president. They got 100 days to give African Americans what they are demanding. If there's not movement in 100 days, trust me, we know how to disturb the peace. We know about peaceful, nonviolent protests. We know how to make people feel very uncomfortable. And so black people showed up. And this is why I think it's important for us to have this conversation, because I had this conversation in the community. First thing they asked me, Mr. Griggs, why should we get out here and vote? Ain't nothing gonna change. I made a promise. Listen, if y'all go out and vote, we'll hold them accountable. Just please go vote. They went and voted. Now it's time for us to hold them accountable. That means the George Floyd police reform bill, because policing in America, the laws around policing in America haven't been changed since the 40s. So it's time to revamp policing with the law. We need to deal with reparations. That's a real conversation. It's time for reparations and repair for African Americans. It's time for us to have this conversation. We got to get something for our vote. I respect what Cube was trying to do and a couple others, but we got to get there. It's time to have that conversation, because if you can give reparations to Japanese Americans for their internment, if you can give reparations to Jewish Americans for the Holocaust, you can definitely give reparations to African Americans for the worst Holocaust in the history of the world. And so I think we got to start having these difficult conversations. And I think it's time for us to respectfully say to the other minorities, listen, we got y'all, but it's about us for right now, because we the ones that got Joe Biden the nominations, and we are the ones that got him the White House. So it's time for him to deliver for us. And after he delivers for us, then we can deal with everybody else. But we're not going to the background. We're not going to sidestep our issues. We need to deal with the repair of our communities. We need to deal with the protection of the rights of our communities. And we need to have a real conversation with our elected officials. We went and voted. Now it's accountability time.
Man, that was well said. I definitely agree with you. And you brought out some interesting things in that like you said, 100 days. I was thinking about that too. With us being so divided, as we spoke of earlier, is there even an agenda that will kind of address us as a totality of a people?
I don't think there's
that who's presenting the agenda? That's the big.
Yeah, I don't think there's a complete agenda, because again, black people are not monolithic.
Okay.
But there are issues that need to be addressed immediately. And we all know what the issues are. It's just like JD said in his meeting with the NFL. We all know what the issues are. We need to deal with police brutality. We need to deal with it right now, because the biggest protest in the history of this country just happened because of George Floyd. It wasn't about anything else but police brutality. So the George Floyd policing bill needs to be passed in the first 100 days. The Obama 21st Century Policing Initiative needs to be mandated either by legislation or by executive order in the first 100 days. These are low-hanging fruit that you can do. We can address everything else, in the 4 years, but we need to address that in the first 100 days. We need to, we need you to do more than just say Black Lives Matter. We all know Black Lives Matter. You need to have legislation that speaks to Black lives mattering. You need to convene the families that have suffered at the hands of police in the first 100 days to come visit the White House and listen to their stories. You need to hear that pain. You need to make sure that you understand that the reason why we say Jacob Blake's name, and the reason why we say Ahmaud Arbery's name, and the reason why we say Breonna Taylor's name is because those families deserve justice. So in the first 100 days, you need to re-empower the Department of Justice to go back into the consent agreements to hold local law enforcement accountable. You need to tell the civil rights division of the Department of Justice to bring up these police officers that have violated the public trust on federal civil rights charges in the first 100 days. That's how you address African Americans' needs in the first 100 days.
Do you think that demand can be met?
It definitely can be met. That's low-hanging fruit. It's real easy to appoint an attorney general that's going to take civil rights seriously. That's real easy. It's real easy to go back to the consent agreements that were made after Mike Brown, after Eric Garner, and after Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. That's easy. So that's easy. Now, the rest of the agenda and the rest of what African Americans need, I think we need to convene a body of African American leaders chosen by the community to have a conversation about what else do we need, and that needs to happen. But those three things are low hanging fruit.
Now, wouldn't it's interesting you said a body? Now, wouldn't that be something like our Black Caucus or our SCLC or our 100 Black Men or our NAACP? Where are these organizations in these times? Not saying that they're not doing anything, but it seems like these are our key organizations because they've been formed and they've been in place so many years and they have so much experience and their roots are so deep in the soil of Black activism and Black consciousness. It seems like that these are the organizations that, along with the church, the Black church, we should be able to actually draw our ideas from, draw our power from, draw our strategy from. So are they active? And I'm asking because I really don't know. I don't see them, but that's not to say that they're not actually doing the work. Because I look at Warnock, and I think Warnock is a strong. He's powerful. He represents everything that to me that we need right now on the front line. So I just because you're out there. So from that standpoint, do we lean on these, or do we need new, fresh minds, new, fresh talent, new, fresh organizations? What is your take on that?
I think we need a mixture of both. You know, I come from the oldest civil rights organization in the country. We have created some of the greatest leaders of all time. But I also am a part of grassroots organizers that are new organizations. So I think we need a mixture of both. And then we need to hear directly from the community. Because I think that's one of the missing links that's driving this new movement is coming from the community. So I don't think there's one organization that knows everything there is to know about the needs of Black people. I think that we need to convene a meeting of all of the Black leaders as chosen by the community to have a conversation on how we move the Black community forward and how we push legislation and policy tools to do that. And I think that our elected officials need to understand that the policies need to speak to the needs of Black people because, again, disproportionately, Black voters pushed this administration into power. And let's be clear on something. It was Black people. Yes, our sisters voted disproportionately higher than Black men did, but Black men voted disproportionately higher than anybody else but our sisters. So it was Black people, especially in the state of Georgia. 91% of Black females voted for Biden in Georgia. 81% of Black men voted for Biden in Georgia. So we have this narrative that Black men didn't show up at the polls. That's not the truth. How do I know? Because we were driving Black men to the polls. We were making sure we were going to the barbershops. We were making sure we were going to the strip clubs. We were making sure we went to all of the concerts. And we were making sure we were engaging people on these platforms and in person. And we're going to do it again for this runoff. But we need to dispel a myth. And this myth is this, that Black men are not engaged in our community. We are very much engaged, and we are engaging other brothers to get engaged in our community. And so we need to kill that narrative. We need to kill it today.
Oh man, I totally agree. And I also would like to kill a narrative that, because you just said something, even though I knew you was just speaking, but you said Black men in the barbershops, Black men in strip clubs. We need to actually create more situations that Black men are in from I would just say from a more positive note. All Black men ain't in the strip clubs.
No, that's true.
All Black men ain't in the barbershops. All Black men ain't at
you know what I'm saying? I would hope a lot of brothers are in the barbershop getting a haircut. I know I need a haircut, but yeah.
But it's a lot of, but you know what I'm saying? It's like these places are stereotypical where you think Black men are going to be. And that kind of like pigeonholes us and corner, it puts us in this thing. We're so diverse. We're everywhere. So I know that you didn't mean that like that, but I just wanted to make that point because I'm listening intently to you. And some people may think, oh, that's just what Black people hang at, especially when you said strip clubs. And that's not true. You know what I'm saying? But it's good. We needed to go there and get those brothers too, because a lot of times, oftentimes I would say sometimes that'd be the most misinformed because they're not really into politics like that. A lot of people ain't even playing into that game like that. So
exactly. And what I was trying to get across is we started engaging others who have disengaged from the system. So that's why I brought that up. But of course, Black men are everywhere. Corporate offices, we're on golf courses, we are Of course, your doctors, your lawyers, and we your bus drivers, we your janitors. We are your husbands and your brothers and your nephews, and all of those things. And, you know, we are not monolithic. But I just want to kill that narrative that brothers aren't engaged in the political process. We've always been engaged in the political process, but there are a lot of our brothers that are currently incarcerated or currently unable to vote because of the system.
Exactly.
And so we're working on changing laws to get more of them engaged. And then there was, you know, 12% of the community that, you know, drank the Kool-Aid and wanted to go vote for that guy, you know, and more power to them. I engaged with them as well, you know, told them they were a little confused, you know, but ultimately, you know, the large majority of black men voted in this election for the new administration, and we want to see policies that speak to the entire community, the black community.
Right. Exactly. Right. And in the case of reparations, this is a good one, and I'm not going to be long because we coming to the conclusion. But I definitely want to ask you, in the case of reparations, do you see reparations being something just from a monetary standpoint that needs to be disseminated and allocated to the people, or is it something bigger? And I'm gonna get somewhere with that when you answer that.
I don't know. I mean, you know, the fact that we are genuinely having this conversation is kudos to the activists that have been pushing this, you know, for 100 years, and the new activists that have been pushing this on platforms and in person. So I don't really know. I think again we need to convene a body that speaks for the entire community to determine what reparations would look like for the descendants of slaves. And, you know, maybe that's a quantifiable number. That's a check. Maybe that's forgiveness of student loans. Maybe that's giving us back land that was already given in the field order that was given after the Civil War. Most people don't know we were actually given the 40 acres and a mule, and they back. Well, they gave us the 40 acres. They didn't give us the mule.
Right.
So, you know, I think first and foremost, we need a bureau. We need a freedman's bureau that needs to be recreated, and the bureau's job is to determine what's in the best interest to allocate the reparations to the descendants of slaves. So I think that's the first step, and then convening a body to govern that bureau to allocate the resources, whether that's money, land, loan forgiveness, you know, something dealing with the redlining that's occurred, dealing with mass incarceration. These are issues that need to be addressed. I think first thing you need to do is establish a bureau that's charged with doing that.
Yeah, I agree with you, and also I see some complexities coming in that. Whereas for those who may have been born here, but their mother and father, or grandfathers, or grandparents from another country, and they came here just because they're black, they haven't, their ancestors didn't endure what took place over here in America, but they're here. They may have been born here, so are they really do that? Are they really, you know what I'm saying? Are they do the reparations? Because, you know, they from somewhere else. They might be from another country where black people at. So it's like, it's so many diverse black people here that could be
some intricacies that have to be worked out. You know, I've heard that argument as well.
Yeah.
You know, my issue somewhat with that argument is some of the people that came from other places, namely they came from Caribbean nations, they had slavery there too. They came from South American countries, they had slavery there too. So, you know, we have to be careful not to alienate other members of the diaspora, because the diaspora is very big. And, you know, a lot of people came from the continent and went other places. So, you know, that's why we need a bureau to figure these things out. But the fact that we're having this conversation speaks volumes to the activists that have been on the front lines for years on this issue.
It does, and I appreciate you even partaking in it. And I hope Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, they really just embrace the agenda that's going to be set before them. And, you know, I look to see positive things, man. I'm very optimistic and altruistic about what's going to take place next year, even though, you know, at the time I wasn't. But I really feel like, you know, our vote really mattered this time. The droves that we came out in was awesome to see. The numbers just proved it, you know, proved our power, our voting power. it's just an awesome thing to see. It was very historic, something I'm glad I seen in my time, and my children had a chance to see that as well, man. That was awesome to see, man.
I think that was the biggest thing, that our children got to see it.
Yeah,
Many of them were not alive when President Obama was elected the first time. So they got to see it in real time after going through 4 years of, let's just be real, 4 years of hell. It was a battle every single day. And to see us come together, even though we had our differences, to actually push out this historic vote and then get credit for it. That's just something that I haven't seen in my lifetime. Even when we elected the president, the 44th president of the United States, we didn't get credit for that. And then when we decided to not vote, and by not voting, elected the 45th president of the United States, we have to realize that Black people, particularly Black women and Black men, have had a say, if not the definitive say, in the election of the last 3 presidents of the United States.
Got you. Sounds good. Well, look, man, definitely, I want to appreciate you, Mr. Griggs, for coming on, man. It's been a pleasure. It's been very informative. You've definitely taught me some things. I've gained a lot of knowledge and insight as to the law and some things that I'm going to actually go back and study and make myself more abreast on intellectually and from a knowledge standpoint. And I'm glad you were able to share some of that with our viewers and our listeners. And if you can, just, let people know where they can reach you at, and if they may need some of your legal advice, your legal counsel, and also some of your social media platforms where they can follow you at, and just where they can stay more informed as to what you're doing in the community, what you're doing actually on the front lines of the system and your criminal defense, as far as helping defendants, helping families, and helping those who are in need of your services.
So yeah, you can follow me on social platforms. Atty Griggs is right here on the bottom. Atty Griggs on all platforms. And let me just be honest with you, people. I don't know everything there is to know about the law, but I do know where to get it. And I also know where to get our history directly, so that we can engage ourselves and prepare the next generation. The worst thing that we could possibly do is to leave this world in a worse place for our children than what we inherited. We didn't inherit the best, but we also didn't inherit the worst. We are on a continuum. And just as Dr. King said so eloquently so many years ago, the arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. And this generation, we've learned that we have to bend it. So let's continue to bend it to make sure that we get justice for our children and that we are our ancestors' wildest dreams, because we really are. If you think about it, not more than 3 generations, many of our ancestors were slaves, brought over here in the Middle Passage in feces and waste and despair from a continent that we haven't seen since. And now we're here, and we have been fighting ever since then. Don't let anybody fool you to believe we weren't fighting. We were fighting the whole time. And we continue to fight. We come from kings and queens who were fighters. And so we have to continue that fight. Do never get despaired about the system, because we have been bending and breaking the system since the point we came over here in chains. And so now it's time to fully throw off the shackles and chains of oppression and make this country great for the first time. And so thank you guys for listening to me. Again, like I said, I don't know all of everything, but I do know a little bit of something. And what I would like to see in these United States is that they live up to what they say on paper: freedom, justice, and equality for all. And so once we do that, we can truly say that this is the greatest nation in the world. But until we get to that point for freedom, justice, and equality for all American citizens, particularly the brown and Black American citizens, but most particularly the Black citizens, then we can't say that. And so I'm appreciative of all the activists. I'm appreciative of your platform for allowing me to speak. If you want to follow me and engage with me, again, all social platforms at Atty Griggs.
Well, I don't know if you can hear me. I think I lost sound. If you can't hear me, nod your head. Can you hear me? All right, cool. I can't hear me, but I'm going to just speak anyway. Hey, again, I thank you for joining us. For all my viewers and listeners who had the opportunity to join us this evening and this hour on Do Not Allow This Radio, feel free to get in touch with Mr. Griggs if you need any type of legal advice, any type of legal counsel. And thus far, if you just want to just learn more about how this system working, and stay with us and join us on in this fight, man. This fight for advocacy, this fight for justice, and also and his dedicated in his mantra, this mercy, this fight for mercy. Anyway, man, I love you, man. I appreciate the work you're doing. And again, I am Red Fidel, the National Chief Strategist for New Order National Human Rights Organization under the awesome leadership of Gerald Emerson Rose, whom I give a strong salute. See you next week, y'all. Peace. Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now we gonna tell them. That in front. We tell them like this, yo. I'm an African. I'm a African. I'm a African. I'm a African. Yeah, y'all like that? So no more. This man's mind is open. I'm an African. I'm a African. I'm a African. I'm a. Let's get
And
back
that
to
motive
the
is best developed by recognizing the common enemy.